much damage. I know when they're I was in the camp when that woman was in labour, a few miles out from this village, and it was pouring off from the heavens. And she was down on the ground. There was a double camp, and in the centre was the kitchen where the fire was. And all the women was in the double camp off our camp. The patient and her mother and I was in the labour ward. That was that one. And all the men were in the other camps. And the water was we had a beautiful fire, but they were stealing the turf from a neighbour I knew well. And they said if he was up, he'd give it to them. I knew that too. He would. But I encouraged them, often thought of it. Go again, Biddy, for the turf. When the bag is near gone, they go for the turf. I had a few cigarettes. We smoked, we had a fire. But in the end, the flood was starting to come down the channel on the side of the road, flow over and in under the camp. So I sent one of the men for the doctor, who was living very near. And he came out right away. He rung the ambulance before he came, and came out, and the ambulance arrived just in time to put her on the stretcher before the flood came in on top of her.
Hello again, and thank you for joining us. And tonight, the story of 80 years of home births in County Galway. Some of them in the luxurious nursing rooms of the great houses of the county, and others, as you've just had described there, in the rain-sodden roadside camps of itinerant families. From 1892 right down to 1972, the Kelly family of Kilconnell provided a private nursing service in East Galway. And over the years, the woman you've just been listening to there, 81-year-old Bina Kelly, became something of a legendary figure, riding her small rally bicycle over thousands of miles of highways and byways in all kinds of weather to bring help to the aged, the infirm, and mothers-to-be. She's a woman with a fund of stories and anecdotes from the turn of the century right down to the present day. But few can be quite as amusing as the story of how one-time women's liber and firebrand crusading journalist Mary Kenny came into the world as a prayer child, after her older sister Ursula, that's Mary's sister, finally realised that babies didn't come out of Nurse Kelly's bag. But it took a bit of time to coax that particular story out of Nurse Kelly, and it was only at the prompting of her next-door neighbour and very good friend, Mrs. Marie Lally, that she finally revealed all. However, it was the story of Bina's old bone shaker of a bike that fascinated me most, and so she proudly took it out, dusted it down, and showed that it could still be put through its paces after all these years.
Well, Jim, you're interested in my old bicycle. Here it is, the best friend I ever had. For the highways and the byways. Like myself now, it's getting a bit battered, but not bad. It travelled miles and took me here, there, the highways and the byways, the good roads and across the fields of Holy Ireland. And here it is. It's not too bad. It's down the window, rather. And that's where you had the bag. Yes, you remember that. Yes, that's where I had my bag. And I had another on my handlebars. And I still had to have myself and my raincoats and my everything. Well, look, I can't stick the cold. Let's come inside. That's my bicycle. Good luck to it. Well, the bike is finished and so am I. But I'm not sorry for what the time we both spent together. It was a very happy life, a very interesting. It had its worries, but by God, it had its joys. It's nice to think. My mother started before me. She was the first trained nurse in this place for miles round. And I'm very glad to say that I was able to follow in her footsteps and do what she done before me. And I was the last one of my kind in this place. But I had a wonderful life, and I'm not sorry. I went for miles and miles to all kinds of patients, from the blue blood to the tinker's camp. I did the slums of Dublin in my training, and the lower class. The happiest days I ever spent was with the lower group, the tinkers, as they were then called, and the slums of Dublin. I love to look back and think of it. Never again will I be as happy. I'm not sorry For all the hardships, there were many, but there were many good days and many joys. And it was lovely at that time to visit the homes and witness, if I can explain it right now, the big difference there is in now and in them days. You are called to a village on the case. You may never have known or seen that patient before. You walked in, you met the little children in the kitchen. The husband was worried while he was taking you there. The neighbours was there to help. And those little children always gave me, I cannot explain it. They ran to meet you. They ran round. And I always thought, will they have their mother when I'm finished? It was really sad. I didn't know what I was facing. But then, when labour was over, there was the joy. Her husband was waiting for the good news. He had witnessed the worry and what she has gone through. Always children realize when their mammy is not well. They weren't themselves. They were worried, but they didn't know why. They just hadn't their mammy. And when the baby was born, the joy to the mother, and the father waiting outside a window or a door for the news. And when could he see her? And when you had things ready, and you let the little children see their new baby, sister or brother, and they all had to get a kiss. It was one of the joys I'll always remember, and you couldn't imagine the kick it gave me. It was worth all the worry and all the trouble. And then you had them each day when you visited. One neighbour came in, she was there when the nurse had come. Another came in to get the dinner for the children. Another came in to do this. Another took the washing. And it was wonderful the help they gave me in trying to bring in all my stuff. I often pulled out a drawer and put my baby in it for the first week until they'd get a nice little box or an orange case, cover it over, leave it on two chairs, and you had a perfect baby cot, which they couldn't possibly go out and buy. Now, I've had some cases that I delivered from a first to a fifth, sixth, and seventh baby, and they still kept that little box all dressed up, covered over with a nice coloured piece of cloth, and their little bed in it for each baby as it came along. And they also kept what we called a wool bag, where they kept their sterilised pads folded on their bed. I had those to get after, and that was each and every one of my patients nearly. They were wonderful people, although they never, as I've said before, until my mother started, that was way back in 1890s, and then I came along in 1929 until 1972, and what have you. But there was a big difference, because before that, as far as I can understand, there was no trained nurse in the area. There wasn't. For miles round, they fell back. It was still home births, but they had what was called a handy woman. Once is all ever I met one in the house, and she wasn't left long, because the doctor, he ran her out of the room, and she was in the kitchen. I remember well, and I was there, and the doctor went somewhere. He went down to the parish priest for his breakfast while he was waiting, and some of them in the kitchen came in. The people were new to me, and they said, so-and-so wanted her shawl. She was an old woman, and she was afraid to come in when the doctor was there. Could they bring it out to her? I said, tell her to come in. I felt sorry for her. She meant well, and she was an old woman, and she was there all night. And I said, wouldn't you like now to say goodbye to your patient after you spending the night with her? I would. She says, but I could come in. That lad here, he'd kill me. And she took her shawl, she said goodbye, and said goodbye to me and blessed us and went. Now, that was the only time I ever met a handy woman.
And then people like yourself came on the scene after that?
Pardon?
People like yourself then?
Yes, oh yes. Oh, I was a while out when I met her. Some years practice when I met her. That's right now.
Now, sum up for me. Bina, of course, virtually all of the children were born at home in those years.
Yes, every child was born at home because you had no hospitals. You hadn't Ballinasloe, you hadn't Galway. You had Galway, but you had no ambulance, you had no cars, you had no phones, you had nothing. Yeah, very few people had a car. You were lucky if you had a Nasson trap or a Nasson cart. And then when the war came, we had nothing in the world. Even, I'll never forget it, you had nothing, a basin, nothing, anything enamel in the house. I used to call them the tinker's button because they were coated with tinker's buttons. You couldn't buy anything new, and the people hadn't it. They hadn't bedclothes. They made their sheets out of flour bags, beautiful sheets. They gathered and anything like that, no aisle sheets. They had nothing, but just we got on all through the war. We wouldn't have enough to eat. You wouldn't have a light in a house. I often had to spare a bit of candle between pains to have something for the birth, and I always had my carbide bicycle lamp. And you lit that for the birth. And the doctor, one of the ones I practiced with mostly in this area, Dr. Murphy, he's dead now, Dr. Mercy on him, and he had a storm lantern, a paraffin thing standing with a globe on it, and we used to light that. We spared our lamps for the birth in most cases, and it was wonderful what the people done, both the people and the doctor. You wouldn't get a globe at that time for a storm lantern. And I was in a house one night, and the husband was very handy. He was a gifted man, and we had no light, and the thing was broken. Of the storm lantern, and there was a little aisle for it. And he said, if I could find a 2-pound jam jar anywhere, he shouted at the patient, is there a 2-pound jam jar anywhere? And she said, there is if you go to such a place. And he got it. It was a hearth fire, a lovely hearth fire, beautiful fire. And he'd put a small drop of water in the jam jar and left it down on the hot hearth. And if you saw, it took the bottom clean as a die out of it and fitted down on the thing, and we had light for a while in it. That's the truth. So you see, it was all very difficult in more ways than one. I could keep on talking, but something fresh had come in. It was wonderful what happened. The patients were wonderful, they're people, and the stride they made to meet and have everything for us. And as I've said, the doctors did some wonderful work.
It must have meant a lot of hardship and considerable risks in those years for women in childbirth.
Yes. Oh, certainly did. Why wouldn't it? Would you ever get there in time? Would they get me in time? Would they get the doctor? How many more were depending on us at the time? It was a chance. But it went all right. It did, yes. And then another thing they used to do. Now, if there's a case of circumcision, it's brought to a hospital. If there's a case of tongue tie, if there's a case of club feet who are not permanent, it can be treated at home. The doctors always did it in the home. We had a table, a boiling saucepan, and we met at a certain time during that 9 days and did the circumcision, and tongue tie, anything. And your babies never grew up with an abnormality. They were always examined after birth and treated for whatever was there. We've met many of them. Of course, lots of things we couldn't do had to be done later. But it has improved a lot. One thing I still love about it, coming home at 6 o'clock in the morning, cross country. I knew all the crossroads and the crosscuts of the country. At 6 o'clock on a summer's morning, when the birds were singing and the rabbits running across the paths, it was lovely. And the green fields, it was beautiful that time. It was worth anything. And that spin home, and you'd be scazel arc when you'd come back. Sleep, tiredness, all was gone. You got that feeling, you got that relief, that joy. And then the mother was so rejoiced. Everything was over. She forgot about her pain or labour. Well, that's a tradition anyhow. They say that the minute the baby's born and the mother hears its first cry, they cannot remember labour. It's over, it's gone, it's a blank. That's a real old saying, and I think it's true, because a lot of them said yes. that couldn't. If you questioned them again at another birth, they wouldn't be able to remember most of it. There's something in it. And that passed on. I got a lot of that as well as the patient because I was implicated. I was responsible for their safety and for their lives. And as I said, the mother of all the little children in the kitchen. You did. It was a great kick. I cannot explain it, but it was something heavenly. To stand there and see it, safe and sound, and see the joy of that home, that husband, those kids, what they're deprived of now in the latter years. Yes, even there was a time, and the kiddies used to look forward, if one family got a baby, the others want one. And there was a time they believed I got them here, and I'd have them in a box. But they'd come then to say that number one house got a baby. Well, number 2 and 3 would be at my door going to school. They were walking to school that time and knocking. And they wanted a baby. Now, sometimes my brother met them and he said, oh, she has a box of them upstairs. Come back again, but she's out here now. But in any case, they believed that it would be in the bag, the nurse's bag, under a head of cabbage, or down. That was their idea at that time. But this day, I came back from a case and I had a bag. I left it. I went in the back with my bicycle. I had a patient next door, an old man who was bedridden. And his wife came out and she met me and she said, for God's sake, will you come out to me quick? He's in a terrible state. And I did. And when I came out, again, my bag was missing. Oh, I was in a state. It was a bag I had for visiting now. It wasn't my full kit. But it was all those pounds worth of stuff in it. And things I couldn't bear to have. I couldn't afford to lose. I had my thermometer. I had my everything like that. And I had my charts and my medical form book, my temperature chart, my glasses, everything and everything was in that bag. And my white coat, what have you. But I had the habit of having sweets in it. You see, too. But when I came out, I couldn't get my bag and I went out to her. As she said, didn't you leave it out of your hand there when you were coming out after leaving in the bicycle? I said, I did, but where is it? And she said, so-and-so must bring it. A fellow that was working in Hickey's shop across the road, a wild young lad. I said, no, he never would. He knows what that bag is. I wouldn't do that. But the bag was missing. We searched through it and everything, got the guards. No, tail or trace of that bag. Now, it was gone for weeks. And the sergeant said to me, now listen, he said to me one day, he said, in the beginning he asked me, have you any doubts, any suspicions now, he said. I have, I said. The 2 o'clock school children, if they didn't bring it looking for the baby, so-and-so got a baby, and so-and-so wants one now. And he said, he interviewed them now and all. No, they didn't. I went over to the house and I promised sweets myself that I gave the baby to. No, I said, my father will kill me, he'll beat me. Just think my brother was the father. And no, it was no good. You couldn't get it out of him. Anyway, the priest had it. The guards was up day and night after it. But the sergeant said to me, now he said, it's getting serious, he said. And where is it? And do you suspect any neighbour? Any? Just say, cough it out, gives a hand. Well, do you know, I said, now, what I think of my neighbours? Not one of them, I said, would touch it. Do you know, I said, if one of them got a thorn in their finger, they just wouldn't bother. They had to take it out at home. They come up to me. I couldn't doubt them, I wouldn't doubt them, and they never done it. But I still stick to what I started in, the 2 o'clock children. Well, I was here when the guards were out searching the plantation, searching everything. They got a tip from someone that the kids was a bag on a little hill near a plantation. And next day there was a wall in the plantation, and they'd got to that wall. And next day they were going over it. It got dark on them. And that evening, a young girl from here had an appointment with her boyfriend on the quiet. She was engaged to one man. She was doing a line with another. And so was her boyfriend in something, the same predicament. And they met. She told her mother she was going down to Father Dial for tea. He had invited her. And here's where she went over to the plantation, hopped inside the wall, and the first thing she hopped on was my bag. And she got the fright of her life. Did someone take it to relieve themselves? And is there a dead baby somewhere? She whipped the bag, and what was in it? Half the things wasn't in it. And they came back here. Now, he knew my brother well, the fella, and she knew me well, of course, wasn't married to her. And she told me, I said, I can't go back at you. I said, I'll have to go up and get that. My God, she said, I'm ruined. We went up, I went up anyhow to the sergeant. And of course, the lad wouldn't come in. If he did, we were all right. He said, talking to Jack outside. And people knew him. I went up, and I told the sergeant the truth. My God, I said, we'll have to shield her. He said, okay, you cycle down, he said, and go in, and cycle over the tool, he said, and I'll fly over after you. And he did. And we got a lot of the truck and got the most of it next day. And the rest of the school children told it was those two lads that took it for to get the baby. You see, there were shooters in my bag.
Bina, why don't you tell him about how Mary Kenny, the Irish press journalist, how she came into the world?
Oh, Mary Kenny?
Yeah.
Journalist for the Irish press?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Now, oh, yes, I'll tell him that. Like, would you be interested? Well, as you know, her mother, she was Kelly, she lived here. And her father and mother here. In fact, she was one of my mother's babies. All her sisters and brothers were. But later she got married and she had a family of her own. She had 2 sons and a daughter. And there were a lot in Kilconnell, holidays and other times. But her little girl, anyhow, was very anxious for a sister, Ursula. And like all the others at the time, they believed that I had the babies in my bag. And Another one was under a head of cabbage, but mostly in my bag. And Ursula started asking me for a baby. She wanted a sister. And she was coming, I was putting her off. On this day I said, if you have a pile of pennies, you'd want an awful pile of pennies, they're expensive. I'll give you a baby, knowing that Mary would never, or that Ursula would never collect that many pennies and hold them. She told her mother, and she said the family who happened to live next door had quite a big family, was getting babies very often, every 12 months. And she said to her mother, Ursula said, I'm sure the so-and-sos hasn't money for all them babies, and Bina's telling me lies. So she came to me again, and I was so fed up at this time, I said to her, well, Ursula, do you know what? I haven't any. And they should be here, but they're not here. But I said, if you ask Holy God to give you a little sister, he might answer you sooner than me, and he probably will send you a sister. So she went home. That's all I heard for a while. And the next I had a visit from her mother. And she came and she said, blast you anyway. I said, what's wrong with you today? She said, I'm pregnant, yourself and Holy God. And that was Mary Kenny that arrived. A Holy God baby, I called her, and I think they all did. I wouldn't be surprised if she did tell Mary and Ursula when they got older. But she didn't forget it for a while anyhow.
Oh, the Holy God baby, all right. A wild character, even though she settled down a lot now, Different type to what she was a few years back. Burning her bra and everything else.
Oh, well, she got on. She got where she wanted. It was very hard to put her down, wasn't it, at any time? She's a Kelly, all right, and from the West. You couldn't whack them. She never was afraid to say what she thought. And she stuck to what she said, didn't she?
And I think she's probably a bit like yourself, Bina, in many ways.
Well, if she lives as long with me and pulls her car as I did, good luck to you, Mary, wherever you are. So it was lovely. It's lovely to see where they were at that time. There's such a difference now. And that's why I think it has such an effect on the teenage of today. They're deprived of a lot of this, of the joy, of the realization, and the worries and the troubles. And then they're covered over with the joys of the new baby in the home.
Because the mother has to go to hospital and they don't share in it in the same way.
They don't share in it. They don't know what's happening. It's something else. A bundle comes home. It's out of the house and for baby. That's the way they look on it. No, it means a lot. And the nursing mother is a big loss. The nursing mother. The child hasn't a nature. There was an oldish man, not too old, one night, sitting here in the hearth, and we were having an argument about the changes, of the days and that. And he said, "Look at here," he said, "will you talk sense?" And all out. Every house you go into now, he says, there's a cow and gate tin in it. The child isn't breastfed. It has no nature for the mother. It couldn't. Nor the mother for the child. And you'll see them yet, and they'll have less. And his words came true, and they did. There was no nature. There's no nature there now. Parents haven't a say in it anymore. They can't control their kid from 4 or 5 years of age. It's what they say, not what the mother says. And that's the trouble, I think, with the teenager of today. I heard a priest giving a sermon on that not long ago, and he said it was in the home it had to start and be controlled. That the home was the foundation and was in fault. And I think he's right. From my experience of the homes, as they changed as I went along, there were 2 or 3 different dinners, different vegetables. Tom wanted something else, Mary wanted something, and they got it. And they're the same today. No consideration. Everything they want, they must have it. And that's the trouble. Just before you go, something I'd like to mention. I listened to your program on last Friday night, and you were in Loughatoric, Woodford. It brought my memories back to many happy days I spent in Woodford, and I had very good friends there. In fact, one of them, who was a nun and is since dead, wrote me a beautiful verse, re a nurse. I'd like to read it for you. It tells you what she really thought about nurses, but it's long. Suppose I read the first verse and the last one for you. We'll give it a... Mary, would you ever hand me that picture standing up there, please? The world grows better year by year because some nurse in her little sphere puts on her apron and grins and sings and keeps on doing the same old things. That's the first. Now I'll read the last for you. When we lay down our caps and cross the bar, oh Lord, will you give us just one little star to wear in our crowns with our uniforms new, in that city above where the head nurse is you. Now, I think that's lovely. Isn't it touching? It's really true. We deserve that, I suppose.